I'm Ruby Jones, and you're listening to 7am. For the first time in history, almost 1 in 5 Australians support One Nation. Their surge in popularity comes as the Liberal Party bleeds support from both ends of its base, as it tears itself apart over climate and immigration. So is this just a protest, or the start of a permanent shift on the right of Australian politics? Today, Director of Strategy and Analytics at Redbridge, Kos Samaras, on why One Nation is soaring and what it means for the country. It's Wednesday, November 19. So, as Susan Lee likes to say, the coalition didn't just lose the last election, they were, quote, smashed.
Totally smashed. What we as the Liberal Party presented to the Australian people was comprehensively rejected.
So tell me what that meant exactly. What proportion of people actually voted for the coalition and who were they?
Okay, so the first thing we need to look at is the number of seats they won in our large capital cities. So it's about 9 out of about 90 that are urban electorates in this country. 2 of them are in Melbourne, 3 of them in Sydney, and the rest are in Brisbane. They've been completely pushed out of Adelaide, Perth. They've never had a Helter seat in Hobart. So that really doesn't count in this conversation. But there is a live prospect that come next election, they'll lose their footing in both Melbourne and Sydney. And these are 2 cities which, of course, have got massive population growth occurring, massive enrolment occurring. So that's one level of smashing, so to speak. The next one is, of course, what happened to them amongst Generation Z. So that is Australians between the ages of 18 and 28. They received about 15 to 20% of the vote amongst this generation. If we remove regional and provincial Australia from that, amongst this generation, it drops down to the low teens. And right now, as we speak, their polling numbers are at 10% for Generation Z. So it's a structural collapse. So whether it's diverse Australians, whether it's younger Australians, even millennials, the oldest is 44 this year, even they are bad for the coalition. They're not becoming more conservative as the years roll on. Every metric that we look at, except for baby boomers and those who own their homes outright, they are doing badly.
And their decision to scrap net zero, how does that square with what your research shows about what the Liberal base wants?
Yeah, well, the Liberal base that they have still sitting in their column are probably okay with this narrative, and that is they basically abandon net zero and basically don't pursue an aggressive posture when it comes to climate change. The problem is that is almost your entry ticket to talking to younger Australians. When we speak to a lot of Australians, when we say, okay, so do you think our transition to renewable energy is going to result in cheaper energy prices? Most Australians will tell us, no, I don't think so. I think right now my electricity bills are going up. And then we ask them the next question. So does that mean that the country needs to slow down? No. Right? So in other words, the consumer, understand there are problems with the transition. Governments have not moved fast enough and things are more expensive now. But that does not give you an excuse to not take action on climate. And this is where I think the coalition's misreading the data, where they don't understand that most Australians actually are quite complex human beings, right? They will have all sorts of contradictory views about policy areas. But in the end, they still have a view that climate as a problem needs to be tackled.
And you mentioned the people who aren't voting for the coalition, so people in cities, young people. But to take a broader view, just how bad is it for the Liberal Party right now? How low is their polling? Yeah,
we have them at about 20% if we take out the National Party. Most of that 20% is inflated by the Queensland LNP. So their numbers are in the teens in the southern states of New South Wales and Victoria and Adelaide and Perth. And we haven't seen the bottom yet. And they're losing their right flank to One Nation. and they're losing whatever's left of their moderate vote to the Labor Party or the Teal Independents, and they're getting smashed from both sides. They're in a very, very serious predicament at the moment.
Kos, you mentioned One Nation. Their popularity is surging while the coalition goes down. So tell me how popular is One Nation at the moment?
Yeah, so One Nation is growing at the expense of the coalition. So from the August the 31st, when we had those anti-immigration rallies take place, a lot of us who have studied this space predicted that what will happen is that the right flank of the coalition will splinter.
Shadow Home Affairs Minister Andrew Hastie has resigned from the Liberal frontbench, declaring he can no longer remain silent on the issue of immigration. The move
when you elevate issues like this, if immigration is an issue of salience to a voter, that voter will vote for the genuine real deal before they vote for someone who's trying to balance the books, so to speak, and not actually offend everyone. So the element of the coalition vote that is anti-immigration has gone to One Nation.
What have I been warning Australians about for nearly 3 decades? The high immigration coming to this country. It has been...
That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, of course, is the other growth that's occurring for One Nation is again still coalition voters, not animated by immigration, but by a sense that the major party they used to support is just not up to it. They've given up. So they're just voting for One Nation now because basically they think the Liberal Party in particular is just not up to the job and they've lost hope. And so we've seen this surge of One Nation up to about 18% nationally. And it's largely made up of Gen X and young baby boomers living in our regions and out of suburban areas.
And 18%, that's a high figure for One Nation. Can you talk to me a bit about how that fits in with the party's popularity over time? What are the drivers of success for a party like One Nation?
We haven't seen these sort of numbers before. One Nation has done well historically in some electoral cycles, but what we've always seen is that number will dissipate as we get close to an election. What we've never seen before is a One Nation vote this high paired up with a historically low coalition vote. This is the big difference. We are seeing similar pattern to what we are witnessing in the UK, where Reform is gobbling up basically the Conservative vote. So I wouldn't necessarily rule out that we are actually living for a transformative period where there is a possibility that the Liberal Party doesn't bounce back, that we are looking at a transition period where politics in this country is going to look very drastically different in 2028.
Coming up, what happens when the fringe gobbles up the centre? So you're describing what sounds like a bit of a death spiral for the Liberal Party at the moment. Do you foresee some sort of coalition with One Nation in the future?
I could see that, yes. Yes, I wouldn't rule that out. But that will be problematic because a coalition with One Nation means you are not going to come across as appealing to urban Australians, urban diverse Australians. And that coalition will make it very hard for them to win enough seats in the big cities to actually get close to 75 seats as a coalition.
Yeah, because Australian elections, they're fought and won in the middle here. So if One Nation is pulling the Liberal and National parties to the right, where do those kind of centre-right voters end up?
That's why there is probably now a live conversation around what do those Teal Independents do? Do they form some sort of quasi-political movement? I mean, it already exists. Many of them were re-elected, all but one were re-elected. We as researchers are having a discussion as to whether we put Senator Pocock in the list of leaders to rate popularity, which we probably will in the next sample. I probably don't have the answer to what that looks like, but it's hard to see those urban professional classes in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane and Perth and Adelaide vote for a coalition that has One Nation in it.
I wanted to ask what all of this means for Labor, because on the one hand, a low polling for the coalition is obviously good for Labor, but on the other, do you think they are worried both about what this might mean for their primary vote in the future and also, worried about a One Nation resurgence?
They wouldn't necessarily be worried about the One Nation resurgence because their electoral coalition now is made up of diverse Australians in our large cities, young professionals in our large cities. They've cornered the market when it comes to provincial city electorates, which are also probably mini versions of Sydney and Melbourne. So really they have to watch their left flank, which is the Greens. Now, we at times do record very high numbers of Green support amongst Gen Z that supersede and overwhelm the Labor vote amongst that generation. Sometimes we don't, but sometimes we do. So that's a thing that I think Labor needs to be really careful with. Greens at the moment are struggling to get cut through and so on, but I wouldn't rule out that younger Australians just, wake up one morning and go, you know what, this major party that we're voting for, we probably won't do that. Now, there's a caveat to that if One Nation at that time comes across as a serious threat, electoral threat, progressive voters will park their vote on the one party they think that can stop them. So there is that elasticity that I'm talking about where you could see a situation where Labor's vote just balloons just so it can stop One Nation. Because we saw a bit of that. There was a by-election in Wales recently in the UK where former Labor voters voted for the Welsh National Party, which is a social democratic party in that country, to stop reform.
And you mentioned reform in the UK earlier. To what extent do you think that this kind of realignment of the right in Australia mirrors what happened there?
Yeah, it's very similar trends. So the one thing that we can say looks very similar is One Nation cannibalising the Conservative vote. And that's exactly what's happened in the UK with reform cannibalising the Conservative vote. The undercurrents driving that are very similar. Despondency when it comes to party establishment, frustration that the world is unravelling. The one thing we know about the types of voters that left the Liberal Party are now planning to vote One Nation. They're in their 50s and 60s. They've got massive mortgages. And their occupations are generally they work with their hands or stand on their feet. So if you're sitting with a massive mortgage and you're 55 and you've got probably 10 years of prime working age left in you, and you're on a massive mortgage, you're thinking to yourself, I'm not going to retire at 65. That obviously creates a lot of despondency and frustration and anger. And these former Liberal voters are clearly now protesting.
And to what extent do you think that political parties, I suppose here we're talking specifically about the Liberals and the Nationals, really have themselves to blame here for not offering people like that a better solution to the issues they face?
Absolutely. I mean, they have been preoccupied with cultural wars now for a good decade. The last time that the Liberal Party actually took a package of economic reform to the public was John Howard's GST, well over 2 decades ago. It's been a long time since the Liberal Party's actually spoken to their base about what their plan is to address their concerns about the economy and their concerns that they're no longer as prosperous as their parents. They've been talking about net zero recently. They're going to talk about immigration. But the elephant in the room is the economy.
And Labor faces the same challenge, obviously.
Yeah, from the left side, right? So if they do not address housing and they do not address intergenerational inequality and they seem to be treading water, I would not rule out the Greens winning seats back off them in 2028 in significant number.
Well, Kos, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Also in the news, Jess Wilson is the new leader of the Victorian Liberal Party after ousting Brad Batten. Batten was in the job for less than a year after replacing John Pesutto when he lost a defamation case against Moira Deeming. Since then, Batten has struggled to unify the fractured party. Jess Wilson is a former advisor to Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, a first-term MP and now the first woman to lead the party in the state's history. She says her priorities are getting the budget back on track, ending the crime crisis, healthcare and housing. And an international stabilisation force will provide security in Gaza after the UN Security Council approved a US plan. The plan also outlines a possible path to a Palestinian state. Hamas has rejected the resolution and Israel opposes the plan for independent statehood for Palestinians. I'm Ruby Jones. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.